Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to show you a very interesting mad game in, I want to say, an unknown opening. I wrote down London system, but it's not the London system. I played a FIDE master, a young FIDE master, very strong, and who basically plays crazy chess regardless of who he faces. Against weaker players and against stronger players, he likes to mix it up, play weird positions, and then he comes out on top because he calculates well and plays well. And in this game, I declined to go into normal positions at several points. Even though I could have punished his play, I wanted to play the positions I know, which is basically impossible because he just wouldn't let me. So I made mistakes which were, I don't know how to call them. They're, well, declining to play the best move even though you know it's the best move is just weird, but it's because I wanted to get a certain type of position. So let's see what happened. I started with pawn d4, he played d6. And now, of course, if you want to play the principled move, you either play e4 or c4. But I played bishop f4 because I wanted to play the London. And he played h6. Now, h6 is a strange move, and it's directed against players who want to play some sort of setup. This is a waiting move that maybe threatens g5 to expand on the king's side, gain a tempo on the bishop. Doesn't really do anything else, it just waits to see what I do. And of course, the best move here is again e4, and if something like e6, then knight c3, knight f6, and this resembles a normal position, but for some reason black wasted the tempo on h6. I didn't do that, I played pawn to h3, because I just wanted to tuck my bishop away in anticipation of g5. I wanted to create a square for my bishop. And that's exactly what happened. g5, bishop to h2. And this is all still fine. h3 is not a bad move. It's just not the best move. Here he played c6, which is another weird move. And now you really should be punishing this. The idea is queen b6, but it's obvious that the pawn on b2 cannot be taken. So really, I played c3 because I wanted to meet queen b6 with queen to c2, gaining some control over this diagonal. But against c6 I really should continue developing with knight to d2, and if queen b6 I simply go e3, all of my pieces can develop freely, and if queen to b2 then rook b1 and the queen is basically trapped. If queen a2, then knight c4 and the queen is trapped. For example, knight f6, I can just go rook a1 and that's it. And if, I don't know, the queen tries to get away, queen a6 is impossible because of knight d6. If queen a4, then simply queen c1, controlling all the squares, and if he tries to create a square for the queen, again, it doesn't work. If c5, then again knight d6 and I have bishop to b5. So c6, c3 again is not a bad move, but it's not the best move. And I knew it, and I still played it. Queen b6 anyway, queen to c2, knight f6, knight d2, this is normal. Knight d2 is the best move here. He played knight bd7. And when I looked at this game with Ozren, my coach, well, there are two moves here, two moves you can consider, e3 or e4. e3 goes into my setup and it's inferior. Obviously e4 has to be the best move, and it's obvious to anybody that if you can play e4 here, you should play e4. I played e3. Now when we analyzed e4, we actually couldn't find the move for black, and during the game I just played e3. I knew that e4 had to be good, but I played e3 because I wanted to keep some safety in the position in anticipation of e5 or c5. Now what can he do here? If, for example, bishop to g7, then knight c4, and if queen d8, knight e3, and there is tremendous control over these squares, e5 can never be played because I get the f5 square forever. My bishop could come out to c4, then my other knight could come out via e2 to g3, controlling f5 and h5, and it's just a very pleasant position, not to mention the pressure on d6 if the e-pawn should move. And if the e-pawn doesn't move, what does he do with his bishop? If b6, then the pawn on c6 makes no sense. He should really play c5 at some point. I will be threatening e5. And against e4, if he tries to prevent e5 with, for example, knight h5, then again knight c4, queen to c7, knight e3, again fighting for these squares. But I played e3, and e3 still gives white a huge advantage. The engine thinks white is +2, but e3 is inferior. And here he continued to play like a maniac, which, to be honest, I should have expected, and I sort of did expect. He played g4. Okay, so now at this point, imagine if you're playing this game, you're playing a FIDE master, you know that you have to have a better position. This is +2.5 according to the engine, but you feel pressure. You don't like people attacking you like this with a single pawn, and I mean, my opponent is a great player, and this is a great strategy, especially against me, because I play chess like a coward most of the time, and I like safe positions in which nothing is happening and I have one weakness, and that's how I try to win. So here, again, a couple of options. If you want to play bravely, you can either castle queenside, and for example gh3, knight h3 is very good, or you can play e4, and if something like rook to g8, then knight e2 just developing, takes, again, a very pleasant position. All of my pieces are placed naturally, and he's yet to develop. And I have knight c4 coming, castle queenside, and so on. But I played something which is not good. I mean, it's not bad, but the idea doesn't make too much sense. So I wanted to get his queen on this diagonal or on this diagonal to make sure that if the h file opens up, I could have some bishop d6 ideas, winning his rook. So for example, if knight c4, queen c7, I don't know, bishop to e2 or takes, let's say bishop to d3 and h5 and takes and maybe some bishop d6 stuff. But at this point it doesn't work. You can just take and take the rook in the corner as well. That was one idea. The other idea was that after queen to c7 or queen d8, I can play bishop e2. And of course I would like him to take on h3 because I take back with the knight. Also I want to control the g4 square because if I ever take on g4 and he takes with the knight, he will be threatening knight takes pawn in some positions with the rook on g8. I know this sounds complicated, but it made a ton of sense to me. Now, there are more logical moves in this position. Taking on g4 is good, and after knight g4, simply bishop to g3. I can also play e4, and after e5, castle queenside. This probably has to be the best, just taking space and developing. But I played bishop e2, rook g8, and now I continued with my follow-up of knight c4 and bishop e2. H takes, knight takes, and bishop to g3. And now, of course, after b5, my knight is completely misplaced. He's threatening knight e3, taking the bishop. So after b5, I cannot go back to d2. I have to take first. Bishop takes knight. And I thought this has to be okay for me. Rook takes and knight to d2. And it is. This should be a much better position for white. It's about +1. But it's no longer almost +3. I no longer have a technically winning position. And from a practical standpoint, there's a huge problem with what I did. The problem is that I've completely given up the light squares. I have no control, and I really should be playing e4 since I didn't play it yet. At some point I should be playing e4 and maybe even f3 to gain control over the light squares with my pawns. Obviously the dark squares will be covered pretty well by this bishop. He played knight f6 here, and here I made a real mistake. So what I said a minute ago, I should be playing for this. Therefore, the knight does not belong on f3, which I did end up playing. The best move is knight e2, and it's not hard to see why. If he tries to play bishop e6 and bishop d5, gaining control over the light squares, as happened in the game, I can simply go f3. And now this is a great position. Because he has a weakness on a6, because I have a lead in development, and because I'm controlling both color complexes. After f3 he should go back. I go e4, goes h5, I simply go knight f1. This is just tremendous. Seems like a very good position. I don't even know what he does. If bishop g7, I castle queenside. After knight f3, it's a whole different story. He plays bishop e6. And now I, again, should really be playing for e4. It's not the same because I cannot support the e4 pawn with my f pawn, but it should still be okay. But I played a4, which tries to undermine his queenside pawns. Obviously, if he takes, then there are several weaknesses and my rook is great, but he doesn't have to take. Therefore, this could be considered a waste of tempo. He simply played bishop to d5. Again, now I'm not playing e4, ever. So here, the best move should be castles, according to the engine. This was hard to play for me. I considered it, but I didn't want to allow this. And if he plays knight e4, I just take it, bishop e4 and queen to e2, trying to put pressure on the rook. So for example, queen to b7, again controlling the light squares, knight to d2 attacks the rook, bishop f5 has to defend, and now e4. And this would have gained space and would have been better than what I did in the game. But after bishop d5, I played rook h4, which is still, I mean, the position is slightly better for me, but it's getting harder and harder to play. And what he does, from a human perspective, makes perfect sense. He just punishes my play with every move. He played queen d7. I went king f1, since I didn't castle. I wanted to get away from the center and play rook e1 and prepare e4, but it's too late. He plays h5, rook to e1. There was a good move here. I could have played ab, and if cb, then rook e1 here. And the point is that if this knight should move away, the bishop is now attacked. So knight e4 isn't really possible, but knight e4, rook h5. And if knight g3, I can just take that. He has to waste the tempo moving the bishop, let's say to b7. And now king to f2 should be really good for me. He doesn't control the light squares anymore. I can play e4 at some point. This rook is annoying, but it's not that annoying, and he still has to develop. But I played rook e1 without exchanging, and of course now the bishop is defended. So now after knight e4, when I take it, he takes with the bishop. I cannot really take on h5 here. Well, I could, but I don't think it's as good. Takes, fg, rook g3, and maybe a b5 here. So he cannot recapture, but I don't want to lose my g3 pawn. It seems that his attack is much stronger now. Okay, so knight e4, bishop e4, the queen has to move, and queen f5. And now he's controlling the light squares completely. I'm never breaking out of this. And I took on g4, which is okay. And here I made the losing move. Knight to d2 is the only move which surprised me. I was thinking briefly that I could play knight h2, putting pressure on the pawn, but I don't have time for this. He can just play queen to d5 and start attacking me. Knight d2 would have been okay with the idea of f3 eventually. And also gaining a tempo on the bishop, because now if the bishop goes to d3, I go king g1, and eventually I will be able to play e4. But I played knight h4. And I saw one idea for him which I thought I could prevent easily, and after what he played, I did prevent it and I kept an equal position. However, there was a move here that wins the game on the spot. You can pause this position if you want and find a winning idea for black. Okay, so the main theme in this position is that this knight is trapped. Therefore, if he could do this somehow, I'm losing a piece. So he has to move the queen somewhere where it attacks my knight, and then he starts preparing bishop g7, bishop f6. He played queen h5, and of course, if I give him enough time, he's going to do this. Therefore, I play f3, and the position is equal. He has to take, I take, the bishop moves away, and now the pawn structure is symmetrical. My king looks slightly awkward, but it should be okay. And we played on from here. Instead of that, if he plays queen g5, with the same idea of doing this, and then moving the queen away and taking the knight, I have no moves. The basic idea is it prevents f3. If I play f3, then gf3, and my bishop is hanging. So against queen g5, I don't know, a b5, c b5, maybe king g1, trying to do this. I don't know. Eventually he's going to win my knight. So for example, bishop to g7, king h2, bishop f6, rook h1. I'm not in time. If he plays king d7, for example, just bringing another attacker, that's it. I lose a piece. But he did play queen h5. I played f3, takes, bishop d5, and here I made another mistake. And in fact, this one is... well, after this mistake, the game is much better for black and should be winning for black. There is only one way to continue this position, and that's pawn to e4, which is the reason I played rook e1, which we've been fighting over for the last 10 moves, and I did see it, but I thought releasing the tension on the queen side was better, creating a weakness on a7. That makes no sense. So after e4, maybe bishop e6, and simply king f2, and I should have an equal game. All of my pieces are okay. I mean, I can transfer my knight to e3, I can get my rook to the h file, gaining some tempo on the queen. This seems okay. But I played a b5, and of course he doesn't recapture. He plays bishop c4 check, which I saw, king f2, and queen takes. And I thought, okay, there's some pressure here, but I can play queen a1, and then he played a5, and then I realized that I'm in huge trouble. So again, firstly, he has this asset, so if I ever drop my b pawn, I just lose. Secondly, he has the light squares, which I can no longer gain control of. I can try e4, knight g2, and knight e3, but it's not enough. Yeah, I played rook d1. I wanted to defend laterally. a4 and knight to g2. e6, finally developing his bishop, and bishop f4. The idea is I want to go e4 and have my bishop on this diagonal also. I would like to prevent bishop h6 if possible, to make sure I can play rook d2. So bishop e7, e4 finally, king d7, and here I played e5, which is actually a good move, because he shouldn't be trading or allow me to trade, so he has to play d5. And my position is worse, obviously. Against a FIDE master I should lose eventually, but I made his job very easy and played a move which loses instantly. This is one of those moves which you play and then you realize that, whoa, that's just bad. Trying to find ideas is hard though. I don't have time for rook h1 and stuff like that. He can defend everything. I'm not quick enough. That doesn't work. I can try playing knight e3, but he just plays queen b3. And if, for example, rook d2, he continues a3, take on c4, queen takes on c4, b8-3, rook a3. This is overwhelming. Not to mention that my bishop is much worse than his, because it's stuck behind all of my pawns. The main thing is that he is just controlling the queen side completely, and I have to keep an eye on c3, which is very hard to do. But this would have kept the game going. What I played is just atrocious. I played b4. Okay, so obviously he cannot take en passant, and I was hoping that I can blockade the position somehow. So if he gives me time, let's say he does nothing, let's say plays rook g8, then rook h1, and I'm infiltrating here, this is all prevented. Eventually I do this and start attacking and maybe get my knight into f6. This is what I was thinking about. And all of that is absurd, because he has a move that just wins the game, and that's a3. And after a3, I wanted to resign, but I played on. It's completely lost. He is just going to get in with all of his pieces, and the fact that he has this pawn on a3 and has the light squares under control means that I have no room for my pieces. I started my counterplay. In 3 moves I'm going to go back with my rook, as you're going to see. a2, rook h7, queen a4, knight e3, queen b3, and I have to play rook h1. What else do I do? Rook h1. My idea was to take on f7, play bishop g5, but he's going to make a queen. And the game ended very shortly. He's just killing me with all of his pieces. This bishop on d3 is worth more than my queen. I tried knight f1, rook a3 and knight d2, but he just goes to a4 and he's breaking through. Bishop f5, king f2, queen a6, and it's just... This should be in a textbook about controlling a color complex. I tried rook e1, queen d3, knight f1, rook c3, and now I'm just falling apart. Now everything is hanging, and here obviously I'm losing my queen, so I resigned. I played out of inertia after a3. I mean, I didn't have much time on the clock, and I just played moves. I knew I was lost. It's very hard to lose a game like this, where my opponent's main idea was to get me out of any sort of known territory, and I let him do that so easily. I just allowed him to run me over with weird moves. He played g5 and g4, and just... I wish that at this point I was brave enough to play e4, and at this point that I was brave enough to play knight d2 or knight c3. Both are fine. e4 is fine. Knight d2 is just... should be the best move. So I justified his play because I reacted poorly to his bad moves, weird moves, and he just crushed me. I was devastated after this game. I mean, he earned it completely. He played amazingly well against me, and yeah, I promised myself after this game that if I faced someone who played weird moves again, I promised myself that I would play what I think is the most principled and best move, regardless of what the ensuing position will look like. So I guess that's a good thing, that I'm next time in a position like this I am going to play knight d2. I'm not going to play c3. Okay, so this was the round 5 game. Thank you for watching. Tomorrow I'm going to show you a better game from my perspective. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.